There we go. Cool. So welcome to React Denver. Yeah, nice to see Will again and some new faces. I'm just pulling this up here for React Rally. It's going to be here in August. Tickets go on sale tomorrow. Early bird for 400 is the price for early bird tickets. Definitely worth it. I've gone 3 times.
That's my bad.
Yeah, just turn off your sound and mute. The camera array on this thing picks up everything, so you don't have to worry about audio. React Rally is really awesome. I've been to it in person 3 or 4 years. And this guy here is who convinced me to leave my job 2 jobs ago to actually, go after a real career. So thanks to Will. Anywho, we've got Dan here talking about MDX and Next.js. So this is going to be actually really interesting because we just redid the React Denver website using Remix and MDX. So I'm going to have fun comparing and contrasting. Anywho, I'm going to stop sharing. My camera.
Cool. So I don't need to turn my mic on?
No, the TV will be your mic. And then when you share your screen, it'll automatically record that one.
Okay. Sweet. So I should be sharing my screen. Should I move this out of the way?
Love chakra.
Oh, I love, yeah, no, it's great. What the heck? Okay, amazing. Get that out of there. Sweet. So everybody, thanks for coming to this talk. It is about creating a doc site or a blog with Next.js, MDX, and Tracker UI. So like why you would do this, how you would do it. Unlike, I feel like most talks, feel free to ask questions. Like if you have any questions along the way, raise your hand or something. I'll just make sure to call on you. We can also do questions at the end. But yeah, I feel like there's going to be some technical things that might make more sense to just ask about in the moment. So feel free. For a bit of a layout about the talk. So first I'm going to explain kind of the why of why I think this is a good idea. And then we're actually going to go into a demo of how this actually would work in a very basic, bare bones website. So you can kind of see how easy it can actually be. So maybe first about me. So I'm Dan Cortez. I've been doing web development for over 10 years, primarily doing front-end development. I've been using React for since before it was, since it was 0.x. Lately I've been doing smart contract development, but front-end is still just the primary thing that I focus on. And I'll make this talk available to later. So here I'll have links to my socials if you want to connect with me. Yeah, so why choose Next.js, MDX, and Tracker UI? So we're gonna have a slide about alternatives in a second, and there's other ways to do this. There's application frameworks that are kind of focused on documentation sites and blog sites. It's like Docusaurus or Hugo or 2 that come to mind. But I feel like I've actually been in a couple situations where we're using Next.js anyway, and it just doesn't make a ton of sense to bring in another application framework for a subset of your site. So for these specific things, Next.js, what it gives you is static site generation. So with Next.js, you can actually like generate like static files that you can serve, which is super cheap on bandwidth, super performant. Also Next, if you happen to use Vercel, deploying a website is like dead simple. And it is also free for a very long time. So if you've got a personal site, like a personal blog or something like that, it's going to be free for, I want to say forever. And yeah, like I mentioned, you might already be using it. So if you have a website that's using Next.js and you need like this sort of feature set, you can do this in Next out of the box. You don't have to bring in a framework or anything like that. So like Next's feature set supports this kind of like markdown focused content generation experience. Cool. So why would you want to use MDX? MDX is basically, so actually first, is everyone here familiar with Markdown? Cool. So if you're familiar with Markdown, then Markdown's a pretty easy way to write your content. You know, it's much more lightweight than using like a headless CMS or bringing an entire blogging platform. So MDX is basically Markdown in JSX. So if you know Markdown, you kind of know MDX. Let's see. So content lives in your repo. So a lot of these tools like Docusaurus, like Hugo, and so on, like the whole point is that you are writing Markdown files that go directly in your project, and then it like parses those files and like generates the stuff. We can follow the same approach using MDX. We write literally Markdown files and just have some sort of transformer to convert them in a way into something that React can understand. MDX specifically is very like flexible and extensible. So you are not limited to just raw Markdown, so like headings, tables, lists, and all that stuff. You can actually make it so that you can write Markdown that has JSX components in it, and essentially making like custom Markdown components. We're gonna look at how that works. And MDX also has like a ton of plugins available. So stuff like syntax highlighting, latex for like math rendering. A lot of features that you might need in a content editor are already going to be like MDX plugins. And finally, Chakra UI. So Chakra is a design system component framework, and it's super robust. They've got a ton of components. It's themable, it's extensible. It is idiomatic to React, which is to me very important. I've kind of between like the Tailwind and like raw CSS like debate that everybody is having all the time. I'm just like, just use Chakra. It's like got a ton of components and it looks like JSX. So you're not writing a bunch of class names, which is like everybody's main complaint about Tailwind. So with these three things, you got like a nice little stack that's like super extensible, performant. And yeah, I think it's really nice. And you do have to like do a little bit of legwork to get everything set up, but the flexibility that you get versus using something like Docusaurus is just like, it's huge. So yeah, so why you would use these things, you know, but most of all, it is like flexibility. You can get very customized with this stack. And usually like if you're doing super custom stuff with, you know, like Hugo, Docusaurus, and so on, you're probably doing something wrong. So yeah, I personally love the flexibility here. And in terms of like actually creating and formatting content with MDX, so like if you know Markdown, you can use MDX out of the box. And then like I mentioned, it has some advanced features like being able to specify like for every single Markdown like token, let's say it's like a paragraph or a list item or so on, you can specify like use this component to render that. You can write custom components. And like I mentioned, we'll look at how to do that. And you can do a bunch of other stuff like syntax highlighting, like math rendering and so on. So yeah, like I mentioned, there's alternatives, and I would definitely recommend folks like check those out as well, just to like understand the ecosystem. And maybe you decide that, you know, you'd rather just go with like one of these like out of the box solutions. Like my personal favorites are Docusaurus and Gitbook, and honorable mention to Hugo. I haven't used it, but I've heard really good things. Sweet. So let's actually look at how this all comes together in a project. And first things first, so what we're going to be actually looking at is this little website that I have running here on localhost. So we've got the super simple homepage. we've got a blog route, which has these 4 blogs, which, fun fact, I use ChatGPT to like create, and the content is like really good. It's kind of scary. So we've got a slash blog, which lists all of the blogs that are in our project. Each blog, now you can like click into it and like, yeah, like it literally wrote this, and it's all like correct and good information if you want to know like the basics of this stuff. But yeah, so each slash blog slash slug is going to be a blog that is written in Markdown that is being parsed and rendered by like the system that we are going to set up. And so, and I also have a docs page, which is like a very common use case with things like DocuSaurus, which is like having these docs views that has like a sidebar of like individual, like categories or like sidebar items that render like maybe like each step of a process for documentation. So again, blog, we've got a list of blogs, you click in, and then docs, we have like a sidebar where every item in the sidebar is a Markdown document. And as we click the sidebar items, we're like rendering the main content. So yeah, this was like very quick and easy to set up. And we're gonna go through how it all works. So first, just want to talk about some dependencies. So the actual Markdown rendering and like parsing is all, it's actually this guy right here is Next MDX remote, which is essentially a Next specific MDX library that lets you like parse MDX on the server side. Because what we're actually doing is taking all of these like individual pages and server-side rendering them. So we're like generating them at build time. So in order to do that, we need that to happen server-side, which Next MDX remote gives us. Gray matter is essentially like it lets us parse what's called front matter in I don't know, like Markdown document land, which is basically like a little snippet that you put on top of a Markdown document that lets you kind of just like write custom data. And then for the client components, so these two are server only. These things are happening on the client. We've got HLJS for syntax highlighting, remark math for math rendering, rehype highlight, and remark GFM, which are just like some dependencies to like do all the Markdown rendering. These are all of the Chakra dependencies. So you've got Chakra UI React, which gives you like an absolute ton of different components that you can use. And then Chakra is built off of emotion. So if you're using emotion, great. If you're using something else, bums, because React or Chakra uses emotion. And then it also uses Framer Motion, which is like an awesome animation library. And then finally, some utilities. So like for date parsing, I'm using date FNS and low-ES for just doing some like formatting. So yeah, like that's kind of it for dependencies, and it kind of seems like a lot, but I think it's mostly just wiring all the Markdown specific dependencies. I am editing the presentation. Cool. So a high level walkthrough of what we're going to be looking at, or like really like my approach to like putting this demo site together was like, actually before I jump into that, is anyone not familiar with Next.js? Sweet. So yeah, set up a project using like yarn create next app, and then install dependencies, added a Chakra provider to the main app component. We're going to be creating an MDX provider that's going to make the system work a little bit better, add that to app. And then you basically just specify like what routes you want to create this like dynamic content. So for us, it's like blog and docs. And you make sure that your get static props and get static paths, which is what is going to be doing the server side generation, works the way that it's supposed to. And that's pretty much it. Once you do that, you're kind of done, and you've basically recreated like a lot of the functionality and you know those frameworks that we talked about but in a Next.js project and in a way that's, again, super flexible. So yeah, let's jump into some code to see how it all works. Is that big enough? Maybe there? Okay, cool. Sweet. So if you're familiar with Next.js, this should be pretty, yeah, should be familiar to you. So we've got our app component, which has like the things that wrap the entire application. And here, right here, we're just basically setting up HLJS for syntax highlighting, something that you don't actually need to do. But I feel like, documentation probably requires some syntax highlighting. So you just import stuff from highlight.js and register the languages that you want to use to keep the bundle small. And you've got syntax highlighting out of the box. Cool. I'm going to move that MDX provider here. So this MDX provider is something that we created or that we're going to create. And we're going to wrap our components in that. We've got our Chakra provider, which is something that comes straight from Chakra UI React, which basically it's just something that Chakra needs in order for it to work. And with that, we've got our app.tsx kind of ready. So the important thing here is probably MDX provider. So this is like the component that will basically take markdown files and, well, not markdown. This is going to take the output of a thing that's going to parse markdown files and actually render it on the screen. And I think it would actually make more sense to come back to this. But this is basically at a high level, we're just saying hey, for when you hit an H1, when you hit an H2, when you hit a UL or an A, here you can define a mapping of what you actually want to render these things. And one thing that I want to call out is also one of the reasons I really like Chakra UI is it gives you a ton of these semantic components, such as heading. So here I'm importing a bunch of different components from Chakra UI. You can assume what they are. So heading, text, unordered list, ordered list, and I can just map those things directly. So basically when we parse our markdown file and feed it to this thing, let's say that we encounter a H3. So it's gonna take this Chakra UI heading, pass it all of the props, which is probably just going to be children, to be honest. But then we can specify, oh, cool, H3 is, this font size 2XL, and it's going to have top bottom margin of 6. So yeah, you can get very fine-tuned in terms of what markdown components render what specific things. And this is not an exhaustive list. You're going to keep adding to it. You can make custom components and so on. So yeah, this is basically the thing that's going to make sure that our markdown is rendered to the appropriate concept. Sweet. So cool. That's literally the app.js, or sorry, the app.tsx. Our homepage is just this, so yep, this is the homepage, and then the code for that is just going to be right here. Super simple, got our heading, text, cool. We can basically ignore this page. But what becomes a little bit more interesting is blog and docs, because these are actually going to be taking some markdown content and creating these dynamic pages. So let's actually talk about the workflow of creating a blog. So we've got this content folder in the root, and then blog. And this is where I decided to put the blogs. It does not need to be here. You can structure this however you want. We're kind of setting this all up ourselves, right? But I decided that under content blog, I'm going to put my blog posts. And I also decided that I'm going to start the file names with the date that the blog post was written in. And yeah, again, this is ChatGPT generated content. So we've got all of the content body, markdown, we're all familiar with. And then up top, I decided that I want to specify the author. I want to give this post a title, and I'm going to give this thing a description, which we see right here, for instance. So if I want to create a new blog post, I could do like 2023, 0418, hello, React Denver, and then that is not TSX, it is MDX. Oh, damn. Hello, React Denver. And let's say lorem ipsum. Cool. So then if we go here, that just kind of like shows up, which is super nuts. Because like that's such a simple workflow. And maybe if you had this workflow set up, you would blog more. So cool. Okay, so what's happening here? Clearly we have like something that's like looking at this file or at this folder rather, and like doing something with that content, right? So let's actually look at what's creating this page and how that's all working. So that is blog/index. And just FYI, like blog slug is going to be like the individual posts, and we can look at that immediately after. Cool. So blog index. Here we have the function that actually does the rendering of the blogs list, which, as you can see here, is an array of blog items. And as you can see here, a blog item has, it's just an object with the title, description, slug, date, timestamp, and ID. So we have to create these things somehow based on the individual files in content blog. So the way that you do that with Next.js is, or because we want to do this like in a way that's server-side generated. We don't want to do this like every time somebody hits the the website or anything like that. Next has this get static props function, which gets called at build time, and it's going to, for this page, like give this component the props that it expects. So basically, the output of get static props is going to become this blogs array, which is going to, as you can see here, I mean, we're just rendering like post.title, publish.dat, post.date, and then the description. So here's where it gets a little bit interesting. I've got defined here my content path, which is some like node magic, which we're saying is the current working directory, content, blog. So current working directory is the folder that we're in, and then content blog. This is our content path. So we read the contents of that folder, which is going to be like each of these individual items. We filter out any of the ones that don't have MDX in it. In this case, it's not relevant, but just to be safe. So then we create this. We're going to map over each one of these file names and do the following. So we're going to get the entire path to that file by joining the content path with the individual item. So that's going to be like /user/dan/dev/ this name of this talk /content/blog and then file name. Here I'm just like using a regex to get that date out of there. If there's no date, just to be safe again, we're going to throw an error. But once we have, so we've got the build path, right? And then we have this parse file by path function, which we also wrote. And from there, we're going to get its front matter. So again, the front matter in a blog post is this stuff, or an object with this stuff. So cool. Some magic is happening in parse file by path. Not really. It's actually kind of just offloading all of this to gray matter. So gray matter here is reading the contents of this file, at that path, and it returns data and content, and we're just choosing to, format data to front matter and then passing the content back. For this specifically, we're actually not using the content. The content would be the stuff below. We're just using the front matter. Sweet. So we've got the front matter from every single item in this blog folder. And then we're just returning an object. Remember that we're mapping over all these items. So here we're just returning, title as front matter title, description as front matter description. We're gonna use this. So the slug is going to be used for the link that you go to when you click this. Cool. So we're basically just taking the file name and chopping off MDX, and then just doing some date formatting and timestamps so that we can sort right here. But yeah, so this is basically with like a little bit of using like the file system and gray matter here, turning all of these individual items into an array of objects that match the site, which is kind of cool and pretty straightforward actually. So sweet. We deploy this, it builds, it creates this page, or it creates this array of objects, and now that page knows exactly what it should be doing. Cool. So what does the individual blog post have to do? So we're going to do a similar thing with get static props, and then we're actually going to do one more thing because this is all server-side generated. We need to create individual pages at build time for all of these items. So we have to do one more thing aside from get static props, which is get static paths. And this one is a Next.js thing, so whereas get static props tells you or tells Next, like, here's a page to server side generate it, like, or you need its props, and in order to do that, run this function once at build time. Get static paths is like, here's a dynamic page. So remember, blog/any slug is potentially a blog post. So we need to know like what paths might exist so that it can then generate these individual pages for each of these blogs. So cool. What we do here is, again, read the content path, which is one more time content blog, plus the current working directory. Going to filter out any of the ones that do not end with MDX. We're going to generate their slug by chopping off MDX, and then we return this object. And this is like what Next.js expects when you're creating these static paths. So all of our slugs for these, or rather like the slugs for the pages that will exist are going to be these file names without MDX. So now Next.js knows what blog post will exist. So now it knows what to generate. And then for the actual blog post itself, here we have a super simple component, which is just a container with a heading, with the title, a byline, says by author, so like by ChatGPT. And then MDX renderer, which was the thing that we saw earlier, is going to take that markdown and render it. So our get static props function is going to need to return this. And it does so in a very similar way, although now instead of like iterating through all of these individual posts, it's just going to get the content for one post. So our get static props gets the route params. So for instance, at blog/2023-0415 history CSS, this is a param, and this is basically going to be available to this function through params. And here where we say params.slug, it's going to be, again, this. Sweet. So we go to this page, get static props, gets the params. We now parse file by path, which again is just returning the front matter and the content for that individual page or file rather. And this time it's at content path, but we also want to get that individual file. So 2023-0415 history CSS, we get its front matter and its content. Cool. And then we've got the content, which is the body. And then we have this render markdown, which again, very small and it's all being deferred to like all these amazing libraries that make this super easy. So render markdown here gets the markdown content as a string. Next MDX remote has a serialize function, which basically takes that content and creates what the MDX renderer expects. And here we're saying MDX options use these remark plugins to render math. I forget what remark GFM does, but I'm sure it's helpful. And then rehype is gonna provide syntax highlighting and ktext, which is like just like a different flavor of latex for rendering math. Cool. And then the result of this is going to be a promise. So we await it, and then we just pass that as one of the props. So the title comes from the front matter, the description comes from the front matter, the author as well, and then the markdown is the serialized MDX object that the MDX renderer expects. So that content gets fed to the MDX renderer, which is just using MDX remote, which also comes from Next MDX remote. And basically all we're doing here is like taking, like we built a custom component that essentially acts as a pass-through to MDX remote, gets all those props. It's lazy just for performance reasons. And then components, we're telling it, oh, like MDX remote, use these components to render the MDX, or the markdown rather. Sweet, and that's kind of it for the blog. So yeah, this function again, just, you know, from the params, we got the slug, then we basically parse that file, return it to the component, which renders like a couple things, and then mostly just passes everything off the MDX renderer. And that's how this page is made. And then finally, just to like, well, because this is a pretty common use case, but also to demonstrate that you can like kind of do whatever you want with this. Let's look at how the docs pages work. So first, if I go to docs, it's just going to redirect me to introduction. And here's where I like just really appreciate the flexibility of something like Next.js, where you have full control over what everything does. In this case, my docs page is returning null. So like it's not rendering anything. And I actually don't even need this use effect or that user either. Wow, saving so many lines of code, amazing. This get server-side props just says, hey, if you come to this route, let's look at sidebar to maybe make this make a little bit more sense. So we've got docs, there's a sidebar TS. These items in the sidebar are what's going to generate this. And the first one is introduction. Cool, so that's like the slug for the first item. So get server-side props, you're saying, hey, just redirect to /docs/ whatever the first item in the sidebar array is. And it's not permanent because, you know, maybe we want to change that later. Sweet, so now we just have like a super simple redirect. So if anyone goes to localhost docs, they go to the first item, amazing. So what's actually happening in the slug page, which is the one that's going to be generating the content for each of these slugs, so like creating, installation, or install rather, introduction, and advanced. Couple things. First, so like I mentioned before, if you have a dynamic page, in order to server-side generate, you need to use get static paths to tell Next what all of the pages that are going to exist are. So in this case, our paths are, we've got the content path now as content/docs, and our static paths are these files, only if it ends with MDX, so that there's going to be advanced, creating, install, introduction. And then the slug is going to be the name without MDX. So that's one way to do it. As I'm talking about this right now, I could probably just use the sidebar items directly because, like, you know, they are right there. And I have my first question.
Are you caching those files? Like, are those files that are being pre-downloaded, like all of them, and then you're able to switch them, or are they, like, how are you like this? I'm just looking at the filter function here for your MDX.
Yeah, so you can, so get static paths and get static props happen in, when you're using Next.js, they happen at build time. So when Next is building these things, it's going to call, it's going to encounter this file that's a dynamic path because it has like the brackets, right? And it's going to say like, cool, like I'm a dynamic path. What are the actual like paths that will exist? And this function has to return basically this, like, the paths that are going to exist. So what's happening here is that we're going to this folder. Like this is going to happen anytime that the application is built. Like if we added another one like foo.mdx, we would push this up to Next.js. It would be like, cool, I'm going to kick off a new build. There's a new file. Therefore, another one of these pages is going to be generated.
So like it has the potential to become gigantic that depending on like your file, what's in the files.
Yes. So that is kind of the nature of static site generation. You are taking dynamic content and creating literally static or like individual files for like every page. It would be kind of like if you're managing your own like, like HTML, CSS website and you were just adding more like HTML files. It's going to create one for every single one of these, but like, unless you are, I feel like for a documentation website, the limit would have to be really, really, really high in order for it to matter. And honestly, even for blogs, like I don't know that like, since any static site generator is going to basically follow the same approach, I don't know like what the limit is for how many blogs you can write, but I imagine that it would be hard to hit that limit. If you were doing something like, I don't know, using like AI to auto-generate like tons and tons and tons of content, maybe not the right solution. But there's like a ton of benefits to static site generation, right? Like they're static files, so like serving them is stupid easy, like super fast. I want to say that if you're using like Vercel's like edge functions or like edge hosting, they have to be static site generated. So yeah, from a performance standpoint, like the difference of like fetching the content dynamically is like just absolutely huge. But you're right that like if you have like an infinite number of files, you will be creating like just a linear amount of content. Eventually, build times with static site generated content can be slow. And then you kind of decide like, there's like optimizing strategies for sure. Cool. Okay, so we are looking at the docs page and yeah, so again, creating individual or like generating individual pages for each of these docs, at least the ones that ended on MDX. And then let's look at the actual docs page component. So it gets title, markdown, and sidebar content. So like that's a new thing. And the reason that I wanted to add this is to show that you can like get very like kind of like creative with like the different things you can do here. So we're saying that sidebar content is an array of objects that have a route and a label. So this is going to be a little bit more complicated than what we've looked at so far. And the sidebar content, by the way, is to generate this thing. So, like we need to know basically like when we're generating this page, what these items are, what their labels are. So like create and manage, for instance, and like what their route would be. So like create and manages / creating. So cool, how can we do that? So let's look at the get static props for this function. So similar to the individual blog page, we get the params so that we can get the slug, which in this case is going to be creating. We are going to get the front matter and the content for that page. So for this page, cool. We're going to get the markdown, and then eventually we're going to return it as one of the props, as well as the title from the front matter. But then we need to also render what every item in the sidebar is going to be. So even though this is an individual page, we can do a similar approach as what we did for the blog index page, or here. We can actually get all of the files in the content path. So advanced grading style introduction, again, filter out the ones that end with, or that do not end with MDX. And then for each one of those, We're gonna build the full path to that file, get that thing's front matter, and I don't know why it didn't destructure that. Cool, amazing. So we get the front matter for that individual thing. So for each page, we're actually fetching the content for every other page. And then we are going to say the label is going to either be front matter.label. So that suggests that these docs can have like a label key in their front matter, or front matter.title. So for instance, advanced has a title of advanced features and customization and a label of advanced. So if we go here, this is like the title of that documentation page, but the sidebar label is advanced. And like, why would we want to do this? Because, you know, sometimes you don't want to put all this content in the sidebar, I guess, or you don't want to limit this to just be like advanced. So we made the choice to say, if the post has a label, use that as its label, otherwise use the title. And we can see here that introduction, it must have a label since it says introduction. Installation, hey, that one's actually pretty straightforward. So if you look at installation, or install rather, it doesn't have a label, so it's falling back to the title. And that's how the sidebar items are getting created. Sweet. So we create this, or we're creating this content map actually. So we are basically parsing all those things, like parsing each of these files into route and label. Awesome. And the route again is just, it's going to be like advanced or creating or install or introduction. We're reducing that to a map where the routes, route. Oh yeah, the route name or slug, I guess, is going to be the key, and the value is going to be this object. And then here we have sidebar content finally coming into play. So we want to order these as introduction, install, creating, and advanced. And let's say that we actually want to put install first. We can just like move those things around. And now it says, yeah, installation, introduction. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Let's move them back. Now it says introduction, installation. Cool. So by using these like, basically by using the front matter parsing and using Node to like read the file system like contents, and then like offloading all of the actual logic to these like amazing libraries, we created this way to like have a sidebar really easily. And now like every page is going to get that sidebar content, and we can just render that as, you know, a list of links essentially. So yeah, where that's actually happening is we got sidebar content and we just map over each one, and then using Chakra, because Chakra is great, we can say render text as a next link. The href is this, give it a key, and then yeah, like we can look like, oh, is the current route, am I looking at like the current sidebar item like in the route? If so, bold it, otherwise normal, which is how we're getting like the bold here. And then yeah, like on hover, just underline it. And then finally, so that's the sidebar, and then we just kind of like give the markdown to the MDX renderer, and it just works. Sweet. Stop there for questions real quick. Anyone? Sweet. Okay. What's up?
Can you run a build? I want to see how long it takes.
Oh yeah.
Even with screen sharing. It's all right.
No, all good.
I'm curious.
Nice. Cool. It's done. 17 seconds. And I actually don't know how much of that was generating the individual pages, but not bad. And then now we have like a static site that we'd actually like throw on like a static site hosting and pay like literally nothing to, you know, do all this cool stuff. But you may be wondering, like, what else can I do? And you said custom components. So I'll actually show you. That's going to be the thing that I kind of end on. But let's say that you built this for your company and your marketing people were like, yo, like we want to include YouTube. Like we want to make it really easy to like put YouTube videos in our Markdown. Like, okay, let's do that. So I made this, and by I actually mean GitHub Copilot. I was just like, make me a YouTube component. And it was like, I've got you. Also, I see that you're using Chakra UI, so I'm going to use Chakra for it. Yeah, insane. But anyway, so we've got a YouTube component. It takes a source, it parses the ID out of it, and then it basically just like plops an iframe. Cool, like not that exciting. But here, let's see. I gotta read me somewhere. So how I would use it, and here, like, let's see how it would work not in Markdown. So I'll just stick it on the homepage. Sweet, it works, amazing. So, but we actually want to be able to use this in Markdown. So how could we do that? So I've got my lib. By the way, I put everything. So one, this repo will be publicly available. And I put all the Markdown rendering stuff in lib/md. But yeah, so let's, we saw this earlier. It's the MDX renderer. It basically like tells, the Markdown renderer that's under the hood what components to use. We can provide this MDX provider, these provider components. And remember that our entire application is wrapped in MDX provider. That's like one of the first things we looked at. And this is just an object of like tags and what should render those tags. So here I can just add a YouTube tag and render a Chakra box with top bottom margin of 8, which is, these are spacing units, by the way, so it's going to be like 24, I want to say. And then let's import our YouTube component. Sweet. So now if our content has a YouTube tag, it's going to render it. So we can go to, for instance, let's go to blog. Hello, Denver. Why not? Well, that's not going to work. Cool. I don't want to like mess up. Okay, not just going to skip the smiley face. Sweet. So yeah, now you can just stick components that you defined in Markdown, and you don't have to like import anything at all. It just, it picks this up, forwards it onto the whatever is responsible for like outputting this thing, and yeah, just works. Super crazy. I feel like it shouldn't be as easy as this is. So with that, yeah, I feel like the takeaway is that Next.js MDX and Chakra UI offers you a pretty powerful stack for creating documentation and blog websites that's super flexible. And yeah, any questions?
What are your slides built in?
Okay, that's a great question because I didn't know about this application at all until earlier today. It's called Gamma, so gamma.app. And the first thing that it did was like, what's the title of your talk? And I put this in, and then it generated a bunch of the content. So if you're not, yeah, the actual talk is if you're not using AI, start using AI because it's absolutely mind-blowing. No, yeah, it's gamma.app. It's pretty awesome. I learned about it like earlier today. Yeah.
I have 2 talks to write in the next 2 weeks for intro conference. I know much about that.
Yeah, it's super, like you can, I mean, obviously it's not going to generate like the entire thing, yeah. But then after that you can like edit the slides, like the general flow is like super, like it's very fluid and nice. You get like, they're hosted, so you get a share link. Yeah, so gamma.app.
Your solution to documentation with MDX is a whole lot better than my solution. Yeah. I have a lot of gray matter. Not using gray matter. Like,
What am I using gray matter for that you are not, and what was your?
I'm actually using an MDX parser. Like gray matter is a fancy
Gotcha.
parser.
Yeah.
Like I'm yeah. So it's actually really interesting. So I built the website, which is MDX and Remix. I have yet to actually, like, Remix isn't building my page sources like Next is for static content. So I'm quite sure it's actually running that content every page load.
Gotcha.
But so far Netlify hasn't complained. So I'm curious. I actually need to spend some time and update the website, but I'm lazy.
I mean, if you want to, you can just fork this demo.
Yeah.
Like,
I
Yeah.
might.
I know these, talks get uploaded to YouTube. So if you happen to need a YouTube component in your Markdown,
Yeah, I do have that at my, it's just literally an iframe. Yeah, I'll have to play around. It's interesting. Thank you.
cool. Yeah. Any other questions? Sweet. Hopefully this was useful.
Bishop just said Next.js is slick, but I'm worried about Versal's hosting.
Yes,
I have seen some Twitter talk about Versal's hosting.
Totally. So for a personal blog, like I think it would be very difficult to like hit the limits that you would need to hit in order to like have to like pay a ton of money out of pocket. But you don't actually have to host on Vercel if you're using Next, especially if when you build one of these static site generated apps, you can like kind of host them anywhere. Like you could stick them in S3 bucket or like, like you get the raw files, right? Like there's no like, once it's built, there's no dynamicness to it anymore. So if you feel more comfortable just like sticking them in your like Amazon account, like you could do that.
You could probably use GitHub Actions and host on GitHub Pages, or
Yeah.
use Netlify.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to be Vercel.
Right. Yeah. Netlify. I know for a fact like Netlify lets you host Next. I've actually never hosted like a Next.js site on GitHub Pages, but if you can do that, like that's gonna be free.
Yeah,
forever,
GitHub
so.
Pages. Yeah, maybe you have to pay for a little bit of the cycles for GitHub Pages at some point, but I bet the free tier just covers it.
If you're using
Yeah.
GitHub Actions, you pay for the action. So that would deploy the raw HTML. But
Yeah.
even then, for
It's gotta be
personal use, it's gotta be pennies a
Yeah.
year.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think the really important thing is it's something that I've heard like not only for, I know that Twitter was recently talking about somebody who spent a ton of money on Vercel, but it happens with like all these like, SaaS products. It's just like understand your usage limits and I don't know if I would have a card with like just a really insane like credit limit personally. Like I would want to hit my credit limit on. Yeah, I don't know. That's like one way to maybe get around that. It's like if you only have like a $500 credit limit on a card, then you're not going to pay more than that. But yeah, for a personal site, like I've hosted my website on Vercel for years and years and years. I've not paid a dime. Sweet.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you.
I'll stop sharing and get off the stage.
That's great.
All right, that's it. Talk amongst yourselves. Brandon's not kicking us out for a little while longer, but cannot stay here forever. Thanks, folks online, and hope to see you next month. Stop recording.